Now finally we'll look at the switch statement. So let's suppose I have an expression which evaluates to a number. So let's say int the user's choice, and they have to type a number from say 1 to 5 or something, or 1 to 3 maybe. Let's suppose they chose option 3. And what we can do, and just imagine that this is, we read input from the keyboard, they type the number 3, we convert it to a number, which you can do with a method called integer.parseInt, which we'll see later on. That's when you start using the wrapper type for int, which we haven't covered yet, but we'll see that later. But nonetheless, we end up somewhere in the code during the execution of the program code where we want to evaluate what the choice is. And choice is a number, it's a whole number, so it's represented and held in an int data type. So we can do switch on choice, which basically means I'm going to give a set of different pieces of code I want you to execute depending on what the actual value of choice is, and we can just set them up here, the individual possibilities for what that value could be. So case 1, let's say you chose option 1, load the file. Case 2, I'll explain the break in a second. Case 2, you chose option 2, save the file. You chose option 3, quitting by, and then maybe we could quit the program or something. And then we have another aspect, we have a thing called a default case. So what's going to happen here, by the way, before we put the default case in, is basically it's going to evaluate the value of choice, and that's a number which is stored in there because it's an int. If choice equals 1, it'll do this option, and then break means break out of this block, so out of where these curly braces are, okay? If it's 2 instead, it'll print this option, and then again it hits the break, which means it'll break out of there, so it'll go down to here and no longer carry on evaluation. If it's 3, it's going to do this one, it's going to break, and if it's none of these together, these are kind of like if and else ifs. You can think of it kind of like that, but with actual values as opposed to expressions, because choice has a collection of finite and discrete values it can take, as opposed to with if and else ifs, in the parentheses we can put expressions. Here we can't do that, we're just basically saying, we've already got what the value is, which we're going to effectively do the switching on, do the conditionals on, so we're just listing out those finite values as 1, 2, and 3. So if it's none of these, then we go into this default block here, and we could say, I'll try again, and maybe we're in some kind of while loop, where as long as it's none of these, it's going to basically still ask the user for, to type a valid option or something. So if you think of these as being like if and else ifs, the default is really like the else. So if none of those have been satisfied or matched, then do this, do the default case. So let's just put a breakpoint here. If we do Control-Shift-D to debug, you can see here the choice is 3. So if we press F8, it jumps straight into case number 3, and that's because that matched. So it's going to say you chose, quit, quitting by, we get the break. So if we do F8, it breaks out of this construct here, this block, which is enclosed in these curly braces, and then it would print whatever's after here. There's nothing here, so it just basically ends the program there because it returns from that main method. If we put an extra statement in here, just saying done, and then rerun that, we'll just see it'll print option 3 and then say done. If we change this option to option 1, for example, again debug, we got a switch on the choice. It's going to jump into the first case, so case 1, print that out. When it hits the break statement, again, it's going to break out of this curly brace block here, which means it'll end up in here to execute that line, which it does. And it prints the line, as you can see here in the console. You chose option 1, load the file, done. Play that off. And if we put an option 99, which doesn't exist, and we debug that, then you can see immediately we go into this default block where it's going to print out try again, as you can see here. And as I say, maybe you have that in a while loop or something to check that there's a valid option being selected, so you wouldn't necessarily say print done. You just go back to the beginning and get them to keep typing a value until they put one of these in.